We are live.
All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the free Assange online Vigil series number 8.0, hosted by Andrew Smith, Christy Doff, Steve Poikinen, and me, Taylor Hudak. Unfortunately, Christy will not be joining us this evening. She did have a family emergency and hopes to return for next week's special Vigil series. We do want to make note, however, that the emergency is unrelated to Christy's work as an activist, and we wish her and her family peace and comfort at this time. But on another note, tonight we will be discussing activism, the latest on Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning, and also a brief overview of the 2020 presidential candidates and their views on Julian Assange. And then later we will update you on the situation concerning journalist and activist Susie Dawson and how you can contribute to her campaign, One versus 5i. And before all of that, tonight I do want to introduce our two very special guests. Our first guest is Misty Winston. Misty is a wife, mother, and activist, and she identifies as a socialist. And Andrew Smith and I met Misty in Chicago when we were at the Jimmy Dore show, and we just really connected with her. We sat next to each other, and she has been an avid supporter of ActionForAssange and participates in posting signs and activism in her own right. And our second guest is Sam Richards, and he has his own podcast. It's called Community Roots, and it is an engaging podcast with mental health therapists, and they have conversations about relationships, emotional growth, and healing that is vital for our communities. And Off the Beaten Path is sort of an extension of Community Roots, and it features interviews from community members who are putting mental health into practice. So thank you both so much for joining us this evening. How are you guys?
Pretty good.
Good. Thanks for having me.
All right, Sam, I do want to begin with you. Can you tell me a little bit about your podcast and why you started it?
Yeah, I'll start with like why I started it. Originally, my friends and I, like activists here in Columbus, were going to create a new show called Liberadio, and it didn't really work out. But what we ended up doing was interviewing a whole bunch of activists from the community about what they wanted to hear. And a lot of people talked about mental health and how they were really struggling with like, I mean, I've been there too. I'm there all the time. Like just everything that's going on, you feel so like overweighted with what's happening. So I was talking with my mom, who's a licensed therapist, and she got a couple of her like coworkers together, and we put together a podcast to actually talk about like ways that you can keep good mental health, because it's really difficult to today, but also just without a lot of money too, you know?
Absolutely. So you did also mention that you have this Off the Beaten Path, which is kind of like a portion of your podcast or segment. Can you get into what that is all about?
Yeah, sweet. So that one is hosted by Dr. Adrienne Johnson. She's a professor at Wright State University, and we basically like talk to people who are living the journey as in a day-to-day sense, rather than just like reading about a study or learning about just people putting theory into practice. So Adrienne and one of the hosts from the other just regular community roots, we get together and we talk to people. We just had a really good episode with a woman named Sarah Wakefield and Beth McElhenney, which are two members in Columbus and around this area that practice this day-to-day stuff. So they air every other week on Sunday. We're also on 94.1 Columbus, which is a radio station that's run by activists. And yeah, so they air every other week in that way.
Now, what do you see as being sort of common issues that many people are struggling with and tend to speak about, and maybe the root causes for that?
Well, so I think that a lot of activists deal with one, probably being overwhelmed by the system and kind of all the oppressions that we're facing. And I also think that a lot of activists feel overwhelmed by their own financial situations and by what's going on in their day to day lives. That whenever you rebel against a social structure and a um, governmental structure and political societal structure, it's really overwhelming. So I think that the causes are that we're oppressed and that we live under capitalism, which is inherently oppressive. And then the solution is a whole bunch of things, but from a standpoint of mental health, um, like good self care, and we discuss like a lot of this stuff. Even we just recorded today about music and how important music, once you hear it, it can change your mood. It can get you into a right mindset and approach you in a way that no other medium can. So, um,
Let's talk for a minute about self care if we could, because so many people throw that phrase out that it is almost an empty buzzword at this
yeah.
point. So if there's some specifics you can get into, and I agree with you about music, I do. I think it's one of the transitory elements that we could call upon in order to put us in a different mood. Um, but aside from that, like I would encourage people to literally ground themselves, take your freaking shoes off and put them on the earth and go walk around for a little bit. Let that happen and disconnect from all of the devices that are spying on you in the first place for a moment, and go reconnect with something that's a little bit more permanent, a little bit more tangible.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you as far as self care becoming a buzzword. We actually had a discussion off air about whether we should use that word even because it's become kind of overused.
I
But
think
I
that
do,
discussion should happen on air and in front of people, and I think we should really be honest about what that means and what that looks like, because the way that you lose the narrative war, the way that information becomes disinformation and ultimately propaganda, is that a word or phrase is co-opted and then turned uh, into nothing, absolutely nothing. So you've got people thinking that self-care is fucking wine, popcorn, and Netflix, and all that is drawing you into your own bullshit, your own fucking psyche or ego. And it's Netflix is a form of narrative control, Dave Chappelle special aside.
Yeah, and I think the big thing to remember too is meditation isn't a luxury. Like anyone can do it, and it's something that helps out so much. Like even just a walking meditation or a driving meditation, just drive in silence on your way to work and just listen to what you're thinking and try to figure out not even why you're thinking it, but just recognizing that it's there so you can identify and move past it. Because there's, like in my life, there's an unlimited number of stressors that I have going on at any given time, but I can sit down and just free up that space in my head enough that I can say, okay, well, these are the important things, these are the unimportant things, and these are the things that, like, not that they don't originate from me, but they're just ideas and background noise in my mind that aren't even something that's worth recognizing. So I think trying to get people to even just meditate through as a form of like personal health is a really, really good way to get that going too.
Yeah, that's a great point that you bring up, Andrew. I think different things work for different people, however. So I think it's important to know yourself when we're having the conversation about self care, because I think, things like meditation do work for many people. However, somebody with extreme anxiety, I feel like it could go in the completely other direction. Where it can have a toxic effect. Of course, I'm not a psychologist or mental health expert by any means, but just knowing yourself and being aware and knowing what helps you best in those moments is really important. Sam, I do want to ask you also, what do you hope to be gained from this podcast?
Yeah, so well, I did want to talk about self-care really quick, and then I'll totally answer that question. I do think that self-care has been taken away as a word to kind of uh, like it was said before, like wine and Netflix and popcorn. But really, when I think of self-care, one of my favorite podcasts, Ologies, talks about REM, which is reading, exercising, and meditation, as well as REM sleep. So making sure you get enough sleep. But all those things are really key. And I would say, like, so I'm somebody who has ADHD and also deals with that, like, sort of anxiety and depression, kind of how the three of them are really intertwined. And meditation is so, so helpful. I found in my own day to day that my thoughts, even whenever they become distracting, I can, just by exercising, by using meditation, which is kind of like exercising your brain, is bringing that focus back so that whenever I'm doing long projects or whenever I hyper focus on this Wikipedia page clicking thing where suddenly it's been an hour, I'm on Wikipedia the whole time. Whenever I practice meditation, once I realize I'm doing that and I'm just kind of going down a rabbit hole, I can bring it back and focus on what I want to focus on. So I would just say, like, ADHD is super it fits into that anxiety and depression, but is also really benefited by meditation. So I would encourage, like, whenever we say self-care, think of REM. Think of that, like making sure I'm reading so I'm off those screens and I'm like not staring at that blue thing. Make sure that I've gotten enough to eat and exercise. And so
Well, you are not alone as far as ADHD. I have it two other guests, or two other people on this show have it, myself and Misty too. So Misty, maybe what kind of works for you with regard to ADHD? To me, I think meditation, I don't know if I could even get through that. I've been told I should try it, but it's interesting to hear that you say that that works for you. So Misty, I do want to get your thoughts in on that.
Yeah, meditation also does not work for me either. It's impossible for me to slow my brain down enough for that to be effective. My husband's like really amazing at shutting his brain down, and I just don't have that ability. And so something that like always works for me, and I'm glad that you were, talking about music earlier, but music is probably the thing that I use the most to deal. I mean, I suffer from depression as well. And so I think that that's something that I use to really kind of center myself. And yeah, so I mean, I think music has probably been like the most effective thing for me personally.
yeah, and so part of how, like, why we're making this podcast is to be able to connect to everyone, especially, like, I make it for activists, and WGRN 94.1, like I was talking to you about, airs in the inner loop of 270. So it's a lot of that activist low income community that we're creating this for, so that if you can't afford like a therapist not to say that this is subsidized, but just, I feel like there's a stigma with some mental health therapy. And I also think that we're not trained on how our own bodies and thoughts and emotions work. Like, our four core subjects are about math and science and like red, white, and blue history. But there's nothing dealing with actually mental health other than like maybe a small class you're in high school. So we wanted to spread some information out there about how to deal with certain things, how to get through certain things. And I wanted to make it specifically in mind for like my comrades and my friends who live within 270, because like we're all dealing with this overbearing stress that's coming from this really sick society, I think. But that answers your second question of what I imagine doing with the podcast.
So
Yeah, no, it does.
let's put that, if we could, in terms of how it applies directly to people who are engaging in activism, people who are trying to um, build a movement or push forward with an effort, and what you can do as an individual, or what you can do within your organization or group to kind of ensure um, or at least aid in each other's mental health and mental health preservation.
Like, what can we do as activists? I think like one of the big things that we can do is build community. Like being able to reach out and just kind of hanging out socially with people rather than just for like the cause. Also reaching out. I think that activists are specifically vulnerable to this like um, depression and anxiety and stuff like that because we are fighting the system. So we see everything that's going wrong, like even the destruction of the earth, like how corrupt our politicians are, like the all this stuff that's going on can be so overwhelming all the time. So one of the ways we can fight that is to reach out to each other and look out for each other in a way of like, hey, have you been doing all right? I haven't heard from you in a while. um, Going that extra mile. Actually, we talk about on the show that'll air this Sunday. We talk about how music, just sitting down and listening to music with somebody, can actually boost your friendship just by sitting and listening to the same song because your brain kind of sees it as an experience rather than just a piece of music. But
If I could recommend a great protest artist and just almost like spiritual, like hip hop artist, I would say look up Idea, EYEDEA, and Abilities. He was like a mid 90 or a mid 2000s hip hop artist that some people say he just had a heroin overdose. Other people say that he rapped his way to enlightenment. But the way that he phrases words and uses things just really just can write a story to help you decompress from a situation. And he even expresses it by talking about how he doesn't use music as like this thing that he loves and enjoys doing. That it's his
That's the
escape.
other dude from Atmosphere.
He was part of the Rhyme Sayers in New York. He was like an
Oh,
underground freestylist,
right.
and like his music, just when I explore it, it's almost like it shifts me through realities. Is just the way that I would describe it personally. But the way that he always has something to connect to, whether it's you being in a depressed situation and just having a way or a song to pull yourself out of it, stuff like that. So I really like that idea of using music to build a community.
Oh yeah, what something that I really like is whenever I go to activist groups and activist communities, I find music is really present everywhere. Um, and I think like I was in band in school and just rocking out with people. I was learning how to play the drums and to play with my friends. It's just such a cool experience to be a part of a um, something bigger, even if it is just like music, but it's also like one of the coolest things we've invented.
If you're going to play music with someone, you have to be your best listener. And when you're listening on a level of hearing the musician or musicians next to you conversationally, it makes you a better listener. It's a learned skill, and it's something that I'm glad you brought up, because I think that as activists, we need to be better listeners. We need to be more attuned to the people that are in our community, check in, phone a friend, all that kind of stuff. So I'm glad that got thrown into the conversation.
Yeah, something my mom was talking about as well on the podcast was being able to listen to sad music as well. Like something that I feel like I'm not personally good at is whenever I'm sad, I want to get out of being sad as soon as possible. And but sometimes you just need to sit with it and understand, why is your body telling you that you're sad? One of the ways that you can really help yourself with just music is, I mean, play it by ear. Don't just always be listening to sad music, but you listen to like Sounds of Silence, or like a song that you kind of found that like just relate to in that deep way, is another way. Like, it's simple. It's so crazy to me how it can impact us in the ways to be like, I'm really happy, like this song really lifts my mood, or this song really gets me when I'm sad, or even like, hell yeah, let's go out there and overthrow the system. Like, all, it's crazy that music can do that. And it's really beneficial too.
I mean, shit, there was classical music artists that started riots by just playing violins and pianos and shit. So the technology we have today, I feel like, doesn't even really breach the surface of what's possible as far as affecting the human psyche.
And if you're depressed and you want to listen to depressing music to get out of it, I highly recommend Uncle Tupelo, to a point, not too far, like not to the point to where you're living it. Please don't do that. But Uncle Tupelo will pull you out of a funk if used properly. That's my PSA for depressing music and how to avoid becoming further depressed.
Yeah, I would really recommend, if you haven't yet, I don't know if we'll post the link in the show notes, but the link tree that I posted is, we have a handbook, and it's just a 3-part episode that kind of goes over a brief summary of, hey, I realized that I'm spiraling, that I'm depressed. And so what do I do about that? Or how can I even pick myself up from that? We have a real brief. We're limited to half an hour on our radio station, so they're not long episodes. You just you can get it done in an hour and a half and figure out some cool ways that you can start to regulate yourself and start to be like captaining a ship rather than just kind of like being lost to the waves, you know? So
And the other reason I think it's so important to highlight mental health too is there's a lot of narrative-based propaganda that says it's the conspiracy theorists and the activists that have all these problems and are all these terrible people. And so I think being able to put that mental health forward as taking care of your brain is as important as putting posters up on signs and going to protests is something that's really, at least to me, worth highlighting, because activism is built on mental stability. If you don't have the ability to look the beast in the eyes and say, this is the problem and this is my action, then it all just kind of starts falling down around you.
Yeah, absolutely. So Sam, is there anything else you would like to add about your podcast, or any thoughts about just mental health in general and why people should check out your podcast?
yeah, I did want to talk about real quick, like kind of anarchism. And I was talking to my mom about this, and this is why I was kind of excited, because she's from a different generation, but I could get her on board with an anarchist technique of direct action. Like, there was a need for something like this out there, and we are trying to fill it now, and we're taking it on. And I just really enjoy direct action and saying, like, basically, if you have a problem, like, don't just vote about it, organize and create an alternative that can help protect you. I know that's a bigger conversation than just like this small forum, but just to say, like, I'm really a big believer in direct action, and that whenever you see something that needs done, just get up and do it in the way that this show right here is a direct action move. Like, instead of trying to pander to somebody to just create this show, you guys just came out here and did it. But other than that, like, I think that mental health is something that can turn around your life in some really positive ways, that even if you feel like you're at the end of your rope, you can still be okay because you're standing on a secure rock in your head. And I mean, it's not going to feed you, but it's just as important to keep your brain flossed and well fed, in terms of just like taking some moments to take care of you. And especially as activists, we're so concerned about saving the whole world, but really you've got to start with yourself, because the better equipped you are, the better you feel inside, the better you're going to perform and the more impact you're going to make. So, um, yeah, more so than just the podcast that I'm doing, I would really recommend looking into some ways that you can really benefit yourself and um, like live healthfully, because it really makes a difference, just even in terms of, like, I went through some hard times when I dropped out of college and I was really feeling awful. And I had a really strong group of people around me. And it was the difference between like floating and sinking, because I had that network around me. I had people teach me how to deal with kind of the place I was in. And so, yeah, I think it's important for everyone. And thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah. Something too. I really want to bring you back on to talk about anarchist organizing and things like that, because that's one of the big themes of our show throughout the entire thing is the need for decentralized activism. It's where you and your friends go out and do something, and you don't wait for the protest to come to your town. You become the protest in your town.
Heck yeah.
So I'd love to have you back on to talk about that at some point. And we can figure that out off stream, but I think that would be really, really cool to bring you on to help with that, because that's something that throughout every month we have events going on that we try to motivate people for, and having someone that can also express that in a little bit of a different way would be cool.
And if you choose to be a part of an organization or a movement, be conscious of the fact that you want to build the kind of community within your movement that you want the rest of the world to look like. And if you don't have that within your organization or movement, it's going to fall the fuck apart.
That's my favorite quote in the world, actually, is the next Buddha will be a community. So that's honestly what I'm trying to build.
Heck yeah, I think all of us really have some anarchist strain in us. And anarchists get such a bad rap, but really that's a future forward. It's about free association. It's about like finding a need and then filling it with a solution, as opposed to just being like, I think that, I mean, it's important to be socialist and anarchist, I think. But also, like, let's stop talking about how we're going to make the world a better place, or stop talking about, oh, if we just get enough people on board, let's just build the alternative. And I think it's scary in a lot of ways to just say, hey, I'm going to put myself out there. Hey, I'm going to live. Like, something that I think that is very important is food activism. And that starts with like a direct action way of like cutting out the things in your diet that they're burning down the rainforest for. And so I think all that's really important. And yeah, I definitely come back. I love talking politics.
Yeah,
Andrew
well,
knows more than others.
yeah, thank you so much, Sam. Please feel free to stick around to, stay in the chat and keep the discussion going. But can you let everybody know once again where they can find you?
Yeah, you can find me Community Roots, which is spelled routes, but it's on Apple, Google, wherever you get podcasts. Just search Community Roots. We're a new podcast, and sometimes the search algorithms are a little bit funky. So, but just look around. We're on every one of those streaming sites. If we could, do you guys have show notes so you could post that link?
Yeah, we'll post it.
Okay, cool. Yeah, click that link, and then whatever podcast thing you listen to, you can just scroll down and click the button. But yeah, thanks for having me on the show. I'm excited to hear what you guys have to say.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing all of that with us. And again, please stick with us, and we'll continue the discussion going. But I do want to open it up now to our other guest, which is Misty Winston. Now, again, we did meet Misty in Chicago at the Jimmy Dore show. She is awesome, and she actually was following us before we even met her. So it was pretty cool. She was one of the first people that we ran into when we were there. So Misty, I want to open it up to you, and you just kind of describe some of the things that you do to kind of bring awareness to Julian Assange's situation, as well as the issue of free speech and free press in the US.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. When we met in Chicago, actually, I was really excited that you guys were there, because that was right about the time that Unity for J was kind of coming to an end. And I loved those live streams, and it was really cool to see so many people come together to support Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. So it was really cool to meet you guys there. You guys were awesome. It was super cool to see Jimmy Dore and Steph wearing your bracelet. I've got mine on. But yeah, I think that for me, some of the things that I've done, and I always have a hard time like identifying myself as an activist, because I never feel like I'm doing enough, I guess. But like some of the, I think the smaller things that I do that I think, and I'm glad that we're talking about this, because I feel like a lot of people are looking for things that they can do, but they're also busy. Like I have 2 young daughters, and I have a lot going on. Sometimes it's hard to be able to find things that you can do within the confines of your life and your schedule and how much time you have. And so I think that some of the things that I do is actually starting in 2015, I kind of made a pact with myself that I would try to make at least 20 political phone calls every week. And I'm not perfect on that. There are weeks that I do 40. There are some weeks that I just, can't manage to get 5 in. But I try my best to do that. And so something that I've been doing since Julian got arrested is that he is a topic of conversation for those phone calls every week. So I call my own representatives, but I also call, people say that, if you're not a constituent of a specific politician, that you shouldn't call or whatever. Forget that. If it's an issue of national importance, if it's even like Medicare for all, call all of them, every single one of them, blow them up, because that's the only way you're going to get your voice heard is if you just continue to pressure them. So Julian has been a conversation that I have with a lot of people in my town as well. I have a ton of WikiLeaks merch, and I wear my shirts to the gym and stuff, and anybody who wants to talk about it, I'll talk about it. I just the other day, I was posting signs and stuff. Like there's so many little things that people can do that maybe don't make a huge impact, but I think if everybody did something small, it adds up. And I think that's just something that I think a lot of people get overwhelmed that they can't do anything when they can.
And something too with the little small actions like the putting up signs and the making phone calls. Don't even be afraid to call out of the phone book and talk to the people in your community too, because it's like when I saw you actually going out and putting up signs, it just made me so happy, because what it does is it puts activism in people's lives. Like that telephone pole is a static thing in someone's life. They drive past it 100 times a day. But when you put that new sign up on there, it changes that whole environment. It changes the meaning of that pole on their trip to work, because they get to see it in a different way and have a different thought when they pass it. So I think that things like that are like those small community-based actions make such a big impact that no one really realizes until it's already made that impact on a large scale, because no one's hearing the message free Julian Assange. But when someone's driving down the road and they see it guerrilla market posted on somewhere, then it just creates that mental conversation for them. And maybe 1 out of 100 people that see it will do some research on it, and it'll change their mind or just make them aware of the situation. So
well, and
really
that's a cool thing with where I live too, is that it's a small town. And so I think that there are probably a lot of people who are completely unaware of what's going on. And so if that sign makes one person, go home and do a little bit of research, then you have to start the conversation somewhere. And I said the other day that like small actions like that seem hopelessly like tiny and just kind of you just feel like it's insignificant. But like I said, if everybody, or if 100 people started doing something like that, it really does start to make a difference. And if that one person who went home and did research has a conversation with their neighbor or their sister or their friend, and then that person has a conversation with their neighbor or their sister or their friend, and then you have to start somewhere. So that's kind of like how I've gone kind of gone after it, I guess.
You know that
I was gonna say, you're perfectly describing what we talk about, what we mean when we talk about decentralized activism. Go ahead, Taylor. I'm sorry.
No, I apologize. I didn't mean to cut you off. I was just going to say that I definitely understand what you're getting at, Misty. It's easy to feel like these actions aren't going to yield any results. However, you have to start somewhere, and you start with, yourself. You may, go out and do it with a friend the next time, and then you slowly build up with a community of people doing this. And that's kind of how the four of us hosts found each other. It originally started with Andrew, then I tagged along, then we got Steve and Christy. So that's a way you could build up, because you will find people who do agree with you, who do have the same passion that you share. Now, can you talk a little bit about how you maintain your motivation? You said you're a parent, you have 2 daughters, you're busy. How do you kind of navigate your way through day-to-day life while still advocating and supporting Julian Assange and the issues such as a free press and free speech?
Well, I think that my daughters are kind of a hugely motivating factor. For me, obviously I support Julian and I support WikiLeaks, but for me, it's kind of even, I think people need to step back from that and realize that this isn't just an attack on WikiLeaks and on Julian Assange. I mean, obviously they're the ones who are being made the example. But I think that the greater issue that we're looking at is that really journalism in this country and really around the world has been under attack for a really long time. And I think that really over the past decade, it's gotten kind of scary. Obama was supposed to be the transparency president, but he was horrible. And sorry, Obama fans, please send your hate mail elsewhere. But like, I mean, he used the Espionage Act more than all other presidents combined. And I mean, they had the insider threat program. And I mean, if you go back and you look at, some of the things that journalists said about the Obama administration, he was awful about being transparent. And I mean, I think there was like a record number of denied FOIA requests under his administration.
He jailed many whistleblowers too.
Yeah,
or put them on trial. Yeah.
And I think that people seem to forget, like they think that this attack on the media started with Trump, and that's just not true. Obama opened that door, I mean, just wide open for Trump to walk through and do what he's doing now to Julian Assange. And so I think that, I mean, while we need to protect Julian and we need to protect WikiLeaks, we also need to recognize that this is, to me, it's troubling that people don't find it, they're not more upset about it, because I feel like this is like a giant leap towards like a truly fascist state. I mean, if the media is controlled, I mean, if you look at the state of our mainstream media, that really tells you everything you need to know. It's corporate owned propaganda. And when we're now going after and attacking, the I mean, WikiLeaks has a 100% record of accuracy, and the fact that Chelsea Manning is in jail instead of the war criminal she exposed, and that Julian Assange is in jail instead of the war criminals that he's helped expose, it's really troubling to me that this isn't a bigger deal to people. And being on the left, I've been really disappointed with the lack of response from the left. It feels like people are not recognizing how serious this attack on free speech and the media really can be.
So I want to touch on that for a minute, because Andrew and I have had a couple of conversations about this too, and there's a very real sense that self-censorship is taking part on even like our personal favorite content creators or outlets or journalists, and that they know if they go do an episode about Julian Assange and they put it in the title of their video, that nobody's going to see it if they're dependent on the income for that day, if that's how close to the bone their budget is. They're out, they're fucked, that's it. um and we know that when you talk about things like WikiLeaks, Julian Assange, Chelsea Manning, Susie Dawson, Olubini, um, algorithmically you're censored on most social media platforms. Um, so that's what makes the decentralized activism so important, is that there's a saturation of information on every conceivable level in 3 dimensions and 2 dimensions, through personal conversations. um, but it's disappointing as all hell to watch really powerful, influential people back away from making this more a part of their platform.
I absolutely agree with that. It's really troubling to see people who claim to care about free speech remain silent and not take a stand, because we're at it's kind of a terrifying moment in American history. And it's not, I mean, not just in the United States. I mean, it's, I think it was maybe just a couple of months ago, there was a huge raid on ABC in Australia. And that's crazy. Like, we're raiding news organizations and journalists now. And the chilling effect that it's going to have on the information that's available to the public is, I mean, these are things that people deserve to know. If my government is committing war crimes in my name, I think I'm entitled to know that. And without, protections for whistleblowers and, a true fight for free speech and free press, I'm worried, like, what's going to happen. I really am.
And that's my argument against a lot of the modern progressive politicians. Is you want to gain healthcare as a right, but what are you willing to sacrifice as a right? Like, are you okay with giving up free speech so that way we can have healthcare for everyone? Because that's the point that we're coming down to, and the compromise that we may well see for particular people to win the Democratic nomination, who have a history of showing themselves as willing to curtail to what power demands for them to get through a situation. So I think that that's a really important thing to drive home, is we're having this massive discussion about what rights are and what human rights are and what we should offer as rights as Americans and to non-citizens and to all these different things. But at the same time, all of our pre-existing rights are left out of the conversation. We're talking about healthcare as a right, but we're not talking about privacy as a right, unless it's in the context of abortion, which I think is important. But I think that's a way to build a bridge between digital activism and feminism, is we both rely on privacy. And that's something that we talked about really early on here, was intersectional activism to counter the intersectional fascism that Steve identifies pretty well. And it's pulling groups together. And that's why I really like doing the vigils the way that we do, is because it shows multiple different people fighting the tyranny from multiple ways.
If nobody else is gonna swing at that, man, I'll hop right in. What I mean, you're right. You are. There's a level of, yeah. I don't know. I don't know if anybody's familiar with the author Daniel Quinn or not, and the book Ishmael and Story of B. Um, but we're kind of at the point where the frog's boiled. Like, in terms of humanity, the frog itself isn't going to get out and get out well, but we as observers from outside of the narrative still have an opportunity to inform enough people, that 3.5% of people of the population necessary to push change in a more sustainable direction.
Yeah, unfortunately, people are in larger numbers going to YouTube for their news and going to more alternative websites and outlets. That's on the rise. So that's a very positive trend that we are seeing. And the amount of people who are, still going to, cable news or your traditional media, that audience is dwindling and aging as well. And it's just sort of a shifting dynamic, which is a positive thing. I think as a society as a whole, if you do look over time, we are a lot more moral today than say we were back in 1960. Of course, we have areas to improve upon without a doubt. And we've kind of taken some steps back as far as free speech, and especially with the press, and what's happening to Assange is certainly something that we haven't really done before. So there's that's a major issue. But as a whole, we are kind of progressing. If we could kind of channel that to the issue with Julian Assange and Chelsea Manning, we can maybe tackle that issue that we're really seeing right now. Because if you look at the Pentagon Papers, I mean, I don't think that it was made that big of a deal as Assange is, and those people involved in that case were as hated and smeared like Assange is being smeared.
Well, let's okay. So let's put that into perspective. I mean, we may be more moral in terms of how we think and how we believe, but how we are ruled, how we are governed or legislated, and the rights that we have to claw for or get back and gain back. We're trying to get healthcare in this country that other countries have had for 50, 60, 70 years. Unions are trying to get back the rights that the benefits that they've lost, not gain anything, not get something back, but claw their way back to, if not the base starting point, something just above or just below it. And I think Andrew's right when he says, "What are you willing to trade privacy for healthcare?" If that is what it comes down to. And I think we made that decision in 2003 when people just accepted the Patriot Act. I think, and if that decision wasn't manufactured and made for us, I'm not sure what you could point to as an example for that. But because in terms of basic humanity, the general population being more conscious-ish, coming into a bigger period of awakening, I think we are in a point in time that's poised perfectly to communicate a message of, we really need to do something about press freedom. We really need to do something about privacy. We really need to do something about the way that whistleblowers are being treated, and the way that journalism as a profession has become about access and doing the bidding of empire. And we need to get back to muckraking journalism. We need to get back to journalism being something that makes the establishment nervous, and everything else is public relations.
I totally agree with that. And I think that maybe one of the bigger issues is that, with the Telecommunications Act, and now we have, 90% of our media is owned by 6 companies. And then it's really just jockeying for celebrity. Like our journalists aren't journalists, they're actors. I mean, they sit in front of a camera and they give a performance, and they say exactly what they're told to say. And the people that control the narrative, it's troubling to me that it's these multinational corporations who clearly do not have the best interest of the people at heart at all. It's really scary to me that we're kind of at this point where media is free press is under such I mean, to me, I think it's probably the greatest attack on free speech maybe ever. And I hope that people will wake up to how dangerous it is before it's too late.
Yeah,
And to
you're
try
right.
to,
Exactly. Many people who are in the mainstream media, I mean, they are reading off of a screen, and that message is therefore filtered down. It goes through many different people who are in positions of power before it actually gets to the journalist or the anchor and the person delivering the message. I do want to make an acknowledgement of some people in our chat right now. We have Miss Joss. She's from Denver. She passed out our bracelets. I want to thank her so much for doing that. And we're glad that you enjoyed Jimmy's show and that you took the opportunity to spread the message to, free Assange, and to also bring awareness to the state of the free press in America. So thank you so much for that. And then somebody else also, hello, it's me. They made a point to say, is it possible to delve in more about Julian Assange and the war crimes he exposed? I'm fairly new and barely learning about him. Or if you have any links about him to share, that'd be great. Yeah, we talked a few weeks ago about getting into some of the actual leaks that were published by WikiLeaks, because we find that to be very important. I do think we will be having a guest on within the next few weeks who's sort of an expert in all that they have published. So we definitely will be touching on that in greater depth so people can really appreciate the full extent of everything that Assange and his team has revealed to us.
so I
So I
think,
just want to get that out there. Go ahead.
I think we had talked about it, and we're actually going to start a second Vigil series where we're going to explore archivist files, which are people that essentially have turned WikiLeaks into an actual news story by lining up emails in particular orders to show certain information. But the other thing we're going to do in that same time is explore the books that Julian Assange wrote. And then once that's done, start exploring other ones. So I would recommend ordering like Cypherpunk, The Women of WikiLeaks, When WikiLeaks Met Google, and a couple other Julian Assange titles that are on the WikiLeaks shop. I would recommend buying them from there because the donations go to help Julian. But I want to pivot now back to the conversation about free speech and
Oh,
like.
wait, real quick, just while we're at it,
Mhm.
Chris Hedges has an article about the crucifixion of Julian Assange that really kind of gets into background and situation leading up to right before his arrest. Susie Dawson has a series of articles called Freeing Julian Assange that you can find on ContraSpin and a couple other outlets as well. And then if you want to know like what would happen to Julian Assange were he to go to trial, you can watch my show and watch John Kiriakou explain that because he himself went through the exact same court that Julian Assange would be going through. He faced the same judge that Julian Assange would be going through, and he can detail specifically how that proceeding works and how Julian Assange's lawyers wouldn't be allowed access to the evidence being used against them, and it would be a closed trial and all that kind of stuff.
But to circle back to the conversation we were having earlier about literally everything we're fed being propaganda, something that I have to think about personally, just as a parent, is what age am I going to have the conversation with my kid to tell him that 9/11 was committed by elements of the United States government specifically to limit our civil liberties? And I think that being a parent in this time and being a parent who's also an activist is extremely hard because that's why I do this more than anything at the end of the day. And I hope that that doesn't sound selfish, but for me, I try to fight to make a world that I want to leave my children. And I think almost all activists probably feel that way and get some motivation from that. And if they don't have kids, just from the idea of taking care of the world in general.
I don't
But
think that that's selfish at all. And actually, I think that something else that I do, my kids have actually written letters to both Chelsea Manning and Julian Assange. Like we will sit around the kitchen table and they're 11 and 8, but and so they don't really get it. But we talk about how, that Chelsea was really brave and that she discovered that something was happening that shouldn't be happening, and so she did the right thing and told the truth. And So I mean, they've written letters to Julian and Chelsea, and I think that, you know, trying to get your kids involved at an age appropriate level, obviously. But I mean, like you, I mean, my kids are a huge motivating factor to everything that I do. And I worry about the world that we're going to leave them. And so I think getting them involved, I think also helps them not feel, because I think kids can pick up on, you know, the anxiety that maybe we're feeling about, you know, the situations that we're in and that we find ourselves in this country. And so I think that when they feel like they kind of have some control, or that they have, like, if you talk to them and they at least know that, you know, kind of what's going on, that I think to me, I think it helps. I think it really helps.
Yeah. And this was like, for me, like, I can't not do this. Like, I describe Julian and Chelsea to my two daughters, they're 5 and 7, as the superheroes, because they like watching old Batman and Robin movies. So I tell them that, you know, Batman and Robin got captured. Julian and Chelsea got captured by the bad guys, and they're on the conveyor belt right now. And we are the people coming to save them. Like, the normal humans have to stand up to fight for the superheroes because the power is just that great against them right now. But one of the things that really like touched me early on when I started doing this, like putting up the posters and all that, when Christine Assange added me, and I did talk to her to get permission to read this, but I had asked her, like, what the first question I asked her as soon as she added me, I didn't want to sound like cheesy or anything like that, so I just said, like, what's some advice you can give a dad trying to raise two daughters right now? And the thing she said to me, I sent it to our group chat, but I want to read it off here. She said, spend time with them, read fairy tales, myths, and legends, develop a love of reading by joining up with a local library, reduce screen time, have a pet, spend time in nature, encourage their own thoughts, opinions, and theories, but challenge them gently to sustain why and on what evidence they hold them. Focus on core values, empathy, fairness, and honesty. Encourage creativity, ingenuity, and inventiveness. Discourage materialism and conformity for its own sake. Encourage their interests and skills. Talk to them a lot. Develop a sense of humor. Encourage a sense of justice by not backing them in disputes if they're wrong. Encourage them to see things from other people's point of view. Encourage empathy by asking them to put others in someone else's shoes. Develop courage by letting them see you stand up for your principles and not back down. Validate instinct over ideology, and plenty of hugs. And so I just want to give her a big shout out for that, because that,
That's
as a
amazing.
parent,
That's some of
yeah,
the best parenting advice ever. That's great.
mhm,
I,
yeah,
my heart breaks for her on a regular basis. I can't imagine what she's going through. But I mean, I think that's kind of why I involve my kids too, is that, you know, trying to involve them and get them sort of at a place where they feel like they have some power in the world, like they can do things to change things that they don't, if they see something that, like, they have some agency even if it's something as small as writing a letter to somebody. That's something that they can do. And I think that it's a really scary time to be a parent. Like, it's tough. Like, I worry all the time about so many things. And so, I mean, I think involving them, it helps me because I feel like I'm kind of giving them the tools that they need to move forward in the world. And I think it helps them because it makes it a little less scary when you feel like there's something that you can do.
absolutely. And something I really like to do with them is make signs. Like, it's the cutest thing in the world where my older daughter will write out, no more littering, save the bees, save the whales, save the trees, save the earth. Like, just the things that they express that they care about are those things that I love to just highlight and point forward with them. Because I used to take them to pipeline protests all the time when they were younger. And that was one of the things that I feel like just really resonated, is them at that young age seeing the scars that humans are putting on the world for the pursuit of money. And I think building those ideas that Like I tell them all the time, like we're poor, like we don't have money, but we have each other, and that's what counts. So I think building that sense of community as a family is super important because we've lost that, and then it lets us take that next step of now I have these two awesome people and myself that I know I can rely on to to continue building this community, even if something were to happen to me.
Yeah, I have kids too, and one thing that we've always done is volunteer. And whenever I volunteer for something, then they come with me. Um, we end up feeding a lot of people. We end up hosting a lot of people at our house, like that kind of thing. And Santa Cruz County is kind of a way station in between LA and San Francisco, if you want to think about it like that. Like, not a lot happens here in terms of protest, but you can get to places eventually with traffic in 4 to 6 hours. Um, and it's a stopover for a lot of people who are on their way to an event, and that's where like a hot meal and some listening comes in handy, because people got a lot of shit on their minds, and I can't always get away, but what I can do is provide a comfortable environment for people to decompress.
Absolutely. And I think it's really important to let to like to me to reach out to other parents to say, hey, like why aren't you doing this? Like, why aren't you fighting for your kids in this way? And that's something that I think Susie Dawson highlighted really well when she talked about why she does what she does and is who she is and is in the position that she's in, is because she wants to show her kids that there's more than just what's presented to them that they can fight for.
So I'll jump in and give a different perspective because I'm the only one that I don't have kids, at least right now. But I don't. And so basically, the reason why I do this, I have no other motivation, truthfully, than just my own convictions. That doesn't mean that people that have kids don't do it for their own convictions, but there is an additional motive to do it, and a very strong one, I would imagine. But basically, I just do this because I do care about the future. And this is something that I'm passionate about. And also, it's hard for me to just sit back and let injustice continue to happen and let negative things continue to happen in the world. I think sometimes people just have personality types that they kind of sit back and think somebody else will take care of this. And I think something that we all universally share together, us on this panel, people in the chat, and who are watching, is we all have a sense within us that we want to make a difference, and we don't see ourselves as people who could just sit back and count on somebody else to do something. So no matter what your initiative and reason for getting there, it's just important that you do it. And I think it does take kind of a certain personality type to kind of really be motivated to do these things. But yeah, everybody seemed to be really appreciating all of the advice here. So if we want to possibly move on to maybe some news articles, Steve, I know you shared some in our DMs that you wanted to touch on.
Yeah, I can do that. I know that we were going to talk a little bit about what was going on in the world of whistleblowers, and Ola Beanie, it looks like, is headed back to court, although no longer in custody. And this guy, they had Ola Beanie. Does anybody have a really good handle on Ola Beanie's background? Because I can read off of the article, but I know that the Moreno government, Ecuador's right wing U.S. installed heavily in the pocket of Central Intelligence new president. It was revealed by Ola Beanie's work that he was involved in shady financial dealings, money laundering, things of that nature, a lot of offshore money. That's part of where the That's part of how we found out that Ecuador had received millions of dollars uh, in order to turn over Julian Assange ostensibly. Um, and so he was arrested for that, but never actually charged with anything. And now it looks like he's been charged with some sort of bogus hacking related. They're calling it an assault on the integrity of computer systems in attempts to destabilize the country.
Yeah, I think that's in regards to not the Panama Papers, maybe the Panama Papers, but releasing all of the offshore bank account information
Right,
for the members of the government out there.
right, right.
Yeah, and I don't know too terribly much about his situation, but I do believe he's from Sweden, and he moved to Ecuador to be part of, I can't remember his name, and I don't want to say it horribly wrong, but the previous pro-Assange president's administration,
Right.
if I remember that properly. But I could be wrong there, and that's
Well,
most likely.
He was the personal friend to Julian Assange as well.
And if anyone can help us get in contact with him, we would love a chance to get him on the stream. And that's something that we've been trying to do in the background for weeks now. So if anyone can assist with that, that would be much appreciated. But so do you know much about Olabini, Misty?
I don't, not really. I know that, I mean, he's I guess just a friend of Assange, and that they're kind of going after him. I mean, I guess that's kind of to be expected. I mean, they're gonna, I mean, try to go after whoever they can to get, you know, Assange to talk or whatever. I mean, yeah, I'm not really all that familiar with his situation though.
Yeah, I think it's basically the mere association with Assange is what ultimately was the pushing factor that led to his arrest, because I believe he was arrested the day Assange was as well, or at least the next day.
Yeah,
and I also think, and I also think too, it's sort of like a scare tactic to people who may have been involved with WikiLeaks or worked alongside them, to kind of scare them. That could, and of course, I'm just speculating, that could very well may not be true. However, I do think that's probably a big motive with that. But again, I'm just like you, I'm not very familiar with him and his case, but like Andrew was saying, we would love to have him on the vigils, because his perspective would be very valuable and interesting.
Well, and you don't necessarily have to know the exact details of the case to know how intelligence agencies are going to operate and what people are going to do to try and squeeze this individual or make sure that his voice is silenced, that he's not allowed to do his thing. And you know, arrested without being charged, thrown into jail. If you're someone who isn't like being locked up sucks even after you've already been locked up. Like it never doesn't stop sucking. And if you are 100, if it's your first day, man, it really sucks, you know. And it's 100% an intimidation tactic. It's 100% a fear tactic. It's 100% something to get inside the mind of the person who is doing the whistleblowing or the activism, to scare the crap out of them, frustrate them, make them stop whatever, take them away from their focus. As long as you can get an activist off their focus, you can successfully complete whatever mission it is that you have. You can take key people out of the conversation, like Olabini, like Julian Assange, like Edward Snowden, like Susie Dawson, who's trying to get asylum right now. You can find a way to like silence those voices. You continue winning the narrative war. That's what we're here to try to prove.
So something cool that someone just sent to us on Twitter, and I just retweeted it with a comment. There is an actual complaint section on the Belmarsh Prison's website. Like it's an official UK government website from what I can tell. And you can actually file a complaint about Belmarsh Prison. So I think that might be something interesting if we start flooding their inbox. So I retweeted that. I'm going to get the link out and get that going, because I think that might be something that's really fun. Even if it's just a symbolic thing to try to organize, it still allows us to put pressure on them in a certain way.
Yeah, that could be another initiative too. Maybe that somebody really starts and tries to, implement and put out there. Again, we do want results, but I think it's just important to kind of keep that pressure on and bring awareness that people are paying attention and that they are, extremely dissatisfied with the conditions that Assange is being placed in. And again, I can't stress enough too that his sentence is overly excessive, and he is among people who have committed some really, really horrendous violent crimes. And so I think that's a great thing to point out, Andrew. So thank you for whoever shared that with us. We will definitely tweet that out and be pushing for people to take that initiative.
That was at Flower of Youth on Twitter.
Okay.
But the John Pilger thing, I think I said his name right, that came out from when he was talking about like the condition and what's going on with Julian right now. I actually want to pull that tweet up just so everyone can see it, so it just makes the right amount of impact for people. I'll pull it up and then I'll read it for everybody here. John Pilger said, yeah, he said 5 a.m. this morning at my time. I spoke with Julian Assange at the weekend. His psychological torture is unabated. He remains isolated in his small cell, mostly 23 hours a day, denied proper exercise. He has lost more weight, although approved phone calls to his parents are still not possible. Written 2019. And
so we don't really know why they're not possible. I guess that people are trying to fight for the phones, pretty much. I guess it's very difficult to even get access to a phone. And I'm sure that I remember hearing, and we've talked about this too, at Belmarsh, they often would take like his doctor visits, that time would be taken out of his like visitation time, I believe. So maybe there's something going on with that. But I think it's great that John Pilger did let us know kind of what's going on there, because it does keep the momentum and the need for this activism alive when we keep reminding ourselves of what his environment is like. And it's been going on for almost a decade now. I know, Steve, that you brought that up on Ron's show, that this is going on, what, 8 years, 9 years?
Yeah, we're fully in 8 years of this, and this is the again, I mean, this is baseless detention. This is now turned into 23 hours of isolation, which for a human being is 100% psychological torture. It's disgusting that you could tear away at the fabric of a human being like this, and it's incredible that the constitution of Julian Assange is such that he hasn't been completely fucking vanquished at this point.
But someone in the chat real quick, Miss Joss, she also pointed out, she said, there's also a thing I found today called the Safer Custody Team at Her Majesty's Prison Belmarsh, where loved ones can bring their concerns about a prisoner's safety. So I'm guessing that is specific to a prisoner. So that's another thing that people can also look into if they're interested in really helping with his conditions and environment. Go ahead, Steve. I'm sorry. I just wanted to make sure I didn't forget to mention that.
Oh, no, it's okay. I know that inside a prison, like you were saying, you fight over the phones, but there's only certain hours of the day that they're going to let anyone use a phone in the first place. And if that hour doesn't fall within the one that he's allowed for, his 1 hour out for the day, he's not going to be able to do that. They're not going to pull him. The only thing that they could possibly do would be pull him away from a doctor visit or a lawyer meeting to allow him to use the phone. And then you've got to prioritize that, which is another form of psychological torture, because you're being forced to choose between your possible livelihood, your definite livelihood or future, and your ability to talk to your mom or your dad.
Right. I don't think that it's a priority for them to honor the certain rights that he has while he is in prison. If anything, I think that they would probably try to infringe on that. And again, that's another speculation, but thank you for pointing that out and specifying exactly how that works, because I wasn't too familiar exactly with how their hours go as far as the different things you could do in visitation and all of that.
Oh yeah, there's a million different ways to exert your complete control over a prisoner and show that you have all of the cards or all of the influence or the ability to give and take away. And that's a very important thing psychologically to any human being, is having some sense of agency. A prison like the United Kingdom's Guantanamo Bay is designed to remove all sense of agency out of a human being.
And it's crazy that like one man is such a threat to this global empire that they have to treat him this way. Like this one human being, the words that he can craft and the way that he can present information is so powerful that they don't even want him to have the ability to disseminate any of that information whatsoever, whether it's even just talking to someone to have them be able to get that information out. And that's why I think the letter writing campaigns are so important, because that's one of those things that's almost the only way he has to speak right now. And so I think that like we have to do a better job of representing him. Like we have to get, and this isn't like us, the 4 people on this stream right now, but just in general as a community, get better at putting this forward. Like that it's about Julian to the extent that it's a violation of his civil rights. It's a violation of our First Amendment. It's a violation of all these things. And even if it's not about the person, it's about all of the things that that person is on trial for. And so it's trying to find a way to have people know that, like, yes, this man is being tortured, but this man is not just being tortured because he doesn't want to say something. He's being tortured so we all have the right to say what's on our mind. And the same thing holds true with Chelsea Manning. This is her 3rd time in prison for literally just revealing information. Like, hey, there's all these criminals in our government that gave all of these people the orders to do all of these things. And she's treated like she's the person that gave those orders. She's treated at the end of the day worse than the war criminals are, because the John Boltons of the world are still in power, like literally, not even figuratively.
That really is mind-boggling to me. That, I mean, it's like the only person who is being punished is the person who exposed the wrongdoing, and the criminals are, dancing on Ellen. And
I'm gonna take this to a place of Bill Hicks, and if I interrupted you, then with the second I shut my app, please continue. But Bill Hicks would talk about in his stand-up how every once in a while someone comes along and says, that this is what's really going on. We look through the eyes of love, and we are, more than our rulers, and we kill those people and let the demons run amok. And that's where we're at on a very, I guess I want to say a more real scale in terms of how we've been able to have access to information and better understand a war criminal because of outlets like WikiLeaks, directly because of the work of Julian Assange. Gonna throw that to anyone to pick up. You go ahead, grab that little conversation ball and run with it.
No, I mean, I agree with you. I just hope that more people kind of recognize how dangerous this really is. I think that and I really think that we need to start putting more pressure on, some of the, more influential people out there who are remaining silent. And I mean, we need those voices out there, pushing this into the mainstream, because I think that there's a lot of people out there who have no idea what's going on with Julian Assange, and everything that they know is wrong. And so we really need some of those, louder voices to get the message out in a way that, we don't have the power to do.
It's the end of August 2019. Julian's extradition hearing is set for February 2020. Make noise. Go for it.
Yeah. So
Make noise.
yeah, what I was going to say too, as far as the extradition hearing, I think I've said this before on this vigil, is that they obviously pushed it back to February 2020 so that the hype and the attention on this particular case would die down over time. That's what I personally think. And I would not be surprised if they did push it back again. I hope that they do not, but that is a possibility. But to backtrack a little bit, as far as people who have who are in positions of power, or at least have a voice, a bigger voice than ours, where they could reach more people and are perhaps more influential. I just published an article on ActionForAssange.com about everybody who is running for, just about everybody who is running for president in 2020, their previous statements on Julian Assange. I was inspired to do this because during the first round of debates on June 26th and 27th, or the 27th and 28th, Julian Assange was not mentioned in the debates at all. And I kind of suspected that that would happen. So I figured it would be best that I kind of do my own research and then just kind of provide this collection of statements made by people who want to run our country and who ultimately could potentially decide his fate. So I do have that out there. If you're interested, I encourage you to, look at it, because how somebody views the check on power, how somebody who wants to be in power, how they view the check on power is very telling of what kind of president and leader they will become.
Could you go through some of the,
Yes.
like, I don't want to call them highlights, but
highlight. Yeah, no, I guess it is highlights, really. So yeah, I went through everybody, and what I could say is that there are only 3 people running for president who have had very strong stances in favor of Julian Assange. Number 1 is Representative Tulsi Gabbard. The other 2 are Ian Schlakman and Adam Kokesh, who were both on our vigil. They were on 5.0, I believe, near the beginning of August. Those are the only 3 that really come out and have firm comments and statements that are in favor of Assange, where they would pardon him, or not pardon him, but they would drop the charges against him. And all 3 of them share this support for whistleblowers. Now, there are many who have said, the rest pretty much either have very vague statements about Assange, where they're like, oh, I support him, but they kind of don't come right out and say it. And then many others just flat out say that they don't support him. One interesting point is Marianne Williamson. I want to thank Dak Rouleau, I believe is how you pronounce his name. He's a journalist. He interviewed or asked Marianne Williamson a question about her stance on Julian Assange, which has slightly evolved since her appearance on Jimmy Dore a few months ago. She did say that she's kind of turning around to him. It's certainly not a strong enough statement for me, but I think what it goes to show is that if you really do push somebody and challenge them, like Jimmy Dore did, and like Dak Rouleau did, you could potentially change their mind about this issue, or at least get them to maybe think about, oh, maybe I'm wrong about this, or maybe I should look into this. She's doing that, and I think that's great. Of course, I would like her to have a much stronger stance in favor of Assange, but I found her case to be particularly interesting. Steve, I know you did touch on this article in your show, and you had some thoughts about the article and some of the statements that the candidates had to say. So if there's anything that you wanted to point out.
I do. I want to point out a couple of things. And the first thing that I want to point out is that you are the first and only person to compile a list like that, and you should be really, really, really stoked and send that article to as many outlets, submit it to as many outlets as humanly possible, because you've done something that 100% of media has failed to do up until this point. So that is something that you should be recognized for.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you.
No, thank you, and thank you for giving me something to talk about on my live stream today. I sorry about that. In terms of like specific statements by specific candidates, the the one that made me just want to choke slam someone the most was by Cory Booker, who I had forgotten was running for president. Like, I honestly did. It's not like he's anywhere, and then somebody says there's going to be a debate, and then all of a sudden people remember that he's running. And because he's running, he was asked, going into 2016 what he thought about WikiLeaks. And this is what he said. He said, well, the WikiLeaks are awful, and it was unfortunate, and I'm glad that the DNC chair in Audible stepped aside. The WikiLeaks are awful, says Senator Cory Booker, not because war crimes are bad or not. This is all optics. This is 100% coming down to how the party is perceived by the people who aren't even allowed to make a decision by voting within that party as to who becomes that party's nominee for president. We know that because of a DNC fraud lawsuit that was largely brought about because of the revelations in WikiLeaks. We knew that Hillary Clinton was using the DNC as a slush fund because of that. So for Cory Booker to come out and be angry about the optics is probably like the thing that makes me want to choke somebody. The thing that makes me least surprised is Pete Buttigieg's standpoint. If you're just seeing me for the first time tonight, my name is Steve Boykin, and I host a show called Slow News Day. You can find it on YouTube, find me on Twitter. I have made the point for months and months and months since he announced that Pete Buttigieg is one of the CIA Democrats that have been discussed since about 2017. The existence of people that have worked within the intelligence community in some sort of capacity, who are active or running for state, local, and federal seats. Pete Buttigieg applies to this. Pete Buttigieg says, as someone who was tasked with handling sensitive information that could get people killed, I took an oath and made promises that I would handle it responsibly. And when you're involved in divulging classified information that can harm American troops overseas, that is not something to be taken lightly. So Pete Buttigieg is making the false claim, and Taylor points this out in the article, that there's no evidence whatsoever to suggest that anyone was harmed due to the release of the material that Chelsea Manning provided and that Julian Assange released in the Afghan war logs or the Iraq war diary. It's just the people that were harmed were already dead, and they were in the collateral murder video. Those are the people that were harmed. We have 95, it's probably the wrong actual number statistically. The vast majority of presidential candidates are 100% opposed to, more so than they are tacitly supportive of or fully supportive of, the concept of press freedom and a free Julian Assange. And that is past the point of troubling and to the point of we need direct action.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
And also about Julian Assange at all? I couldn't. Did Joe Rogan talk with Crenshaw about Julian Assange at all? I only made it like 16 minutes into that Joe Rogan
I
show.
didn't watch that.
Okay.
Joe Rogan is sourced in my article, I think twice, maybe.
Yeah. Well, he had like Commander Evil Crenshaw on, the dude with the eye patch.
Okay. I do want to, real quick though, because somebody in our chat wanted to get Misty's thoughts in on this. So also Bernie Sanders, which is very disappointing. He had a very soft statement, I guess you could say, is someone in support of Assange. What he says here, and I believe this was in a tweet, and this is according to an article published in The Intercept. He says, let me be clear, or quote, let me be clear, it is a disturbing attack on the First Amendment for the Trump administration to decide who is or is not a reporter for the purposes of a criminal prosecution, end quote. Okay, that's true, that's great, but I think he would have been a lot better off, and we would appreciate it much more if he were to have a firm stance that if he became president, he would in fact drop the charges against Assange. So Christy, I hope I'm saying this right, Tao Dao wants to know your thoughts on Bernie's lack of support for Assange.
Oh, my friends on Twitter are trying to get me in trouble. Okay, so I have been, if anybody follows me on Twitter, they know that I am openly critical of everybody. I don't have a fave. And so I take a lot of shit sometimes from Bernie supporters for openly criticizing him. This is something I have openly criticized him on. His statement took 44 days to come out with. And then he didn't even mention Julian by name. And I am really troubled by that, because if anybody should be speaking out about what's happening to Julian Assange, it should be he's the leader of the left movement in this country.
So if I can point something out, Julian Assange was taken into custody on a Thursday. On Friday, I drove to Washington, D.C., and I was driving back Saturday. Bernie Sanders had a rally in Michigan on that Saturday already planned, and he spoke of justice and rights and all of these big, grandiose words, but never once when he was talking about the rights of gays and transgender people did he bring up Chelsea Manning. And never once when he talked about justice did he bring up the war crimes that Julian Assange exposed. So for him, he can't talk about it because he's so far down the party line of the Democrats that he has to play their game. And for him,
the fact that he will bring up Russia and talk about Russian interference, but won't talk about what happened in the 2016 primary, and won't address the fact that anything Russia may or may not have done doesn't even almost compare to what our own two major parties do in every election. And
absolutely,
I'm tired of, deflecting to Russia, and I'm tired of, the so-called leaders of the left not speaking out about one of the most important issues of our time. It's disappointing, to say the least.
And I support single payer healthcare. Like, I support most of the positions that he stands on. But to me, the line comes at, we can't fight for new rights if we lose all of our old ones. Like, you couldn't be on stage talking about single payer healthcare in a world of for-profit health insurance industries if you didn't have freedom of speech, because that would become an issue.
I want to walk this dog on the full nature trail and not just around the block, all right? Because Bernie Sanders' campaign is made up of journalists who have gone through censorship, media suppression, who have once upon a time, at least at one point, had something nice to say about the existence of WikiLeaks or Julian Assange. He's got David Sirota on there. He's got Free Gray on there. He's got people who goddamn well know better and who should be fucking ashamed that they, at least as Bernie's surrogates or operatives, are unallowed to say Julian Assange's name in print, in an interview, anywhere. And no one connected to that campaign.
It's like Beetlejuice. Like, you say it 3 times and you lose an election. So they can't, like, they just don't allow it to enter the conversation anymore. And that's literally the biggest reason of why I don't support Bernie Sanders anymore. Like, I have his action figure in my house. I was talking to Steve about it on the video we just recorded. Like, I went all in my life, and I don't want to get too much in detail with it, but because I talked about it there. but he's not someone who can be trusted, in my opinion. Like, he's someone who wants to gain power within a war criminal establishment and isn't willing to do anything to compromise that goal of maintaining and gaining power with war criminals, instead of building alternative power systems to the ones that the war criminals have built.
Cynthia
So,
McKinney calls those power cells.
mhm.
That's what she's talking about, and that's also something that is correlative to decentralized activism, is getting those power cells communicating with each other. That's something that can only happen outside of voting in a rigged system inside a duopoly. And let's be perfectly clear, everyone running as a Democrat in that primary has signed a pledge saying that they are going to support the nominee. Tulsi Gabbard just got screwed out of the debates. Is she going to say anything about it? Is she going to be like, fuck it, I guess I am
See,
running?
what's a more important thing, though? Your
So-
pledge of loyalty and your Stalinistic oath to the Democrats, or the oath you took when you swore to be a congressperson to defend the Constitution from enemies, foreign and domestic?
Or
Like,
as an
that-
active duty Army colonel.
right. Like, your election gets rigged, you should be the first one in line calling it out, making a video, going on all these platforms. But instead, what they did is they set the propaganda machine up in such a way that after the last debate, instead of bringing Tulsi on to Joe Rogan to gain her more support, they brought Bernie Sanders on to split the only voting block which she had complete control of, which was the libertarian viewers and other peace activist viewers of the actual Joe Rogan experience.
Do you think
So-
that's intentional on the part of Joe Rogan? Did Joe Rogan get the tap, and that's what the tap said, is make sure Tulsi doesn't get to come on your show after this debate?
I don't think
is
so.
I don't.
I don't think so.
I think it's more subtle. Like, I think Joe lets everyone come on and do propaganda. Like, I don't think it's just Bernie Sanders or just pro-war people. Like, he'll let anyone come on to just put their mouth dribble out there. And so I think it was that he got contacted by Sanders's campaign saying, "Hey, I would like to come on after this." And so I think it was something that maybe he didn't initiate, but it's something that he didn't push back against either. And he didn't even
Well,
push
it's
back
also-
against him in the entire gun debate, where Bernie literally was like, "Oh, we won't use the FBI. We're just going to make it illegal for you to own these kinds of guns. But we're not going to come to your house and take them. You just can't have them." Like,
So I don't
that's
think
literally the same argument that got made about the fucking Patriot Act and infringing all of our rights there. And no one calls him out on it. Joe Rogan, who's supposed to be this like hardcore libertarian, lets him go on there and say, we have to have people make this compromise because there's less than 1% of individuals that are going to do something crazy.
Yeah, and I don't think that Joe Rogan did that on purpose, because I don't see him as having such a strong agenda like that. I really don't think so. Again, I could be wrong.
He is
But
an
I don't think that it's
incredible power broker. Like, the amount of power that Joe wields that's unrecognized is incredible. Like, he reaches a
think-
whole community of people that aren't otherwise exposed to media. Like, I literally sit here and listen to the Joe Rogan podcast through the wall of my shop while there's a bunch of people fixing cars next door that are listening to it. So, like, the market that he reaches that no other media gets to is so powerful that
That
it's
10.5 million viewers subscribe, not tangentially listening. He is an influence peddler, and I think that he secretly bought a ton of stock in Tesla right before he had Elon Musk on his show and got him to smoke some freaking blunt and like on camera.
he probably bought it after that, knowing that the stocks would plummet.
That's interesting. I do want to make one point, though, with the article, and this concerns Michael Bennet, who I believe is still in the race. He, along with nine other Democratic senators, wrote a letter to Vice President Mike Pence back in 2018, encouraging him to reach out to the Ecuadorian president, Lenin Moreno, and basically ask him to kind of further persecute Assange and abandon his country's support for Julian Assange. This was prior to Mike Pence visiting Ecuador. And it was Michael Bennett who signed this letter, and it is in the article, and I have it linked to the original letter as well as the original article that I found it in, which was the World Socialist website. So I think it's really important to also check that out to see who else signed on to that. It just goes to show how they were so willing to bend over backwards to get Assange and to further persecute him and torture him. When I found this out, I mean, I was really shocked, and I was happy and proud to put it in there because I felt that people needed to know that this was going on behind the scenes, because of course the mainstream media was not covering it. It was the World Socialist website that ultimately put this story forth. So I do encourage everybody to check that out. I'm not exactly familiar off the top of my head who the other senators were, but I know that they were 9 other Democratic senators.
And I think that speaks volumes, because that's literally what happened. They sent that letter saying, "Hey, we want to do this." Trump, being someone completely unprincipled, decided to make a political decision, and I don't know what he got in the background for it, but in the foreground, he and his administration allowed Julian Assange to be trafficked, like not just taken out of the embassy, but to pay billions of dollars to move this man a couple street blocks, so that way he would be in the custody of the US-UK empire.
Yeah, basically what I got out of the letter was that they were using this as sort of a bribe to restore US-Ecuador relations, because they felt that Lenin Moreno, who is more of a right-wing president, that they could, potentially have greater relations with him than the previous president, which was Rafael Correa. And also near the conclusion of the letter, this is so interesting to me. I see it as kind of their way of trying to show that they do support a free press. They wanted to, the 10 senators asked Pence to please relay their condolences to President Moreno about 2 El Camerico, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, 2 journalists of that newspaper who were killed by the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia in northern Ecuador. And they put that at the end. And I think that was just to basically make it seem as if they do support a free press. Meanwhile, the entire letter was aimed at persecuting a journalist, and perhaps one of the best ones of our time.
So Ecuador's former foreign minister, Ricardo Patino Aroca, was interviewed by RTE Spanish, and he said all that Moreno does is an attempt to, oh, it jumped on me. I'm sorry about that. All that Moreno does is an attempt to completely destroy what we have built. Undoubtedly, it was planned, and it was planned with CIA involvement. He is not smart enough to come up with something like this, so it is staged by the U.S. Embassy. He said, adding that a CIA representative is frequently present during presidential and government meetings. He called him a vassal of U.S. intelligence.
That's powerful too, because that's what he is. That's the capacity that he's operating in. He's a tool of the United States empire, just like a lot of the other people down in the South American countries, like how Glenn Greenwald exposed how their fascists got into power. And it was by the help of the US government in coordination with their legal system.
Well, and that's going back to groundwork that was laid, I think, back in like 2012 or 2013. And it came to full fruition in 2018 with the election of Bolsonaro. But I mean, we've got basically another Panama Papers situation here, where the same was in Ecuador. There's a ridiculous amount of money being shifted around between any country that is willing to sell out a genuine hero like Julian Assange, or in the case of Bolsonaro, the planet's lungs and indigenous people that live within the Amazon rainforest for profit. man, like that's because our government is willing to make that choice. It is up to everyone affected by that choice to decide whether or not they're going to benefit from it. If you're not going to benefit from it, you should act to prevent it from happening at an increased rate. You should do what you can to stop it, to change this paradigm, because it is not sustainable.
Okay, so really quickly before we do wrap it up, Miss Joss just wrote in the chat. She said, update on the safer custody teams at UK prisons that she mentioned earlier. She said, I just did some more research and it turns out that those are for prisoners at risk of self-harm, not harm from prison conditions. So thank you for making that clarification, Miss Joss. Yeah, unfortunately, that would be nice if we were able to use the safer custody teams as a way to kind of help Julian, but it seems as if it's for people who are at risk of self-harm. But thank you again for, pointing that out to us. We really appreciate when you guys do that. Before we do wrap it up though, we did want to address one other issue, which is Susie Dawson. She's an activist and journalist. I'm sure all of you are familiar with her. She is a fantastic journalist and activist, in fact, and I don't want to get in too much detail of her case. I do not want to misspeak on this issue. But we here in the Action for Assange Vigil series, we support her and we are in solidarity with her, and she does need all of our support. And she just started a campaign, One versus the 5i campaign, and you can follow that on Twitter at 1vs5i or 1vs5i.com. It's a new campaign, and basically she started also a YouTube series with this where she's going to be kind of updating people regularly on her situation. I believe her current situation is beginning to intensify a bit. Again, I don't want to get into too much detail, but she does need your help.
I can speak
And
a little bit to this. She's been
okay, go ahead.
She's been living in exile since 2015. She
Yeah.
through her work, exposing financial corruption in New Zealand and the existence of shared intelligence networks who target ordinary citizens, citizen activists, journalists. She was and through co-founding the Internet Party of New Zealand, um, she became a high priority targeted individual, and it put her in a situation where she had to flee New Zealand. She is now seeking full legal asylum within Russia, and this is one v5i is an awareness campaign of what has happened to her. Her video diary series is documenting this process of her trying to gain asylum. Um, Her story is mind blowing. Absolutely, just it is beyond cinema because of how just viscerally real it is.
Right. Now, she did say this in her video. She said that her human rights attorney has told her that she is at risk for possible detention or deportation. She is fighting that. She has an abundant amount of evidence in support of her case. She has a very strong case, and she needs and deserves this refugee status and temporary asylum. So please do support her if you can. Also, please follow her new account, the @1vs5i. It's a new campaign. Also, if you cannot donate, you can retweet and inform people with facts. That's really helpful in this case. But we wanted to make sure that we did acknowledge that because she does support our Vigil series here, and we're really grateful for that. And we support her, and her situation is a dire situation and she needs our help. And she is a person, just based off of her work and everything that I know about her. I mean, I think she has more courage in her finger than most people have in their entire being. So she is just deserving of our support, and
something
I
with
just
her
wanted to make
too,
note of that. So
and something with
go ahead.
just vocabulary in general. I don't want to just stand in solidarity with her. I want to stand in action, and I think that's something that's really important to make a difference for. And not that it's because this is something that people don't really say. To me, saying you're gonna, and this isn't against you personally, Taylor. This is just against the idiom in general of solidarity. That's like saying Gondor calls for aid, and then putting up a little picture of Gondor on your Facebook thing and saying thoughts and prayers for Gondor. Like I want the white horses. We need the white horses. We need people showing up and acting in the background and being their voice in their community. So something I'm going to challenge myself to do, and I'd like to challenge some other people to do as well. In September, try to plan a town hall. Aim for the last week of September and find a venue within this first week and just start moving towards that. Because we have to get people in our communities talking about these issues. And even if it's just a watch party, if you want to set up a Wednesday night free Assange watch party, that would be awesome. If you want to have a town hall specifically to address Five Eyes or the assault on press freedom, that's awesome too. But I want it just to be perfectly clear that we're going to be standing in more than just solidarity with her. I want to stand in actual action with her and with Julian and Chelsea and Reality and Ola Binney, because unless we take action and put ourselves in these vulnerable situations, even just hanging up flyers on telephone poles, nothing will change. We can tweet about it, we can talk about it, we can share videos, which is important for disseminating information. But at the end of the day, the only way to get true change is by making it happen in the real world. So I want to make sure that I want to try to introduce that into the conversation where you can say I stand in solidarity with you, but also say I stand in action and then do something, because that's the most important thing, is actually doing something within the real world. And I think that's just to circle back to how awesome Misty is being on the show. I just want to say thank you for going out and hanging up flyers and just for all the community activism that you're involved in, because it just makes such a big difference. Even if us as one individual doesn't see it, it's just the amount of lives that can be changed simply by sharing information is incredible. And that's why Julian's in prison and Chelsea's in prison, because that information and knowledge is so powerful.
That's really nice. Yeah, and that's kind of why I wanted to come on, because this is, like I said, like this is really outside of my comfort zone. I'm super socially awkward and whatever. So, but I was thinking about it, and when I agreed to do it in Chicago, I was drunk, so it was like, yeah, I'll go on your live stream, sweet. And then I realized that I was actually going to have to do that, and so it was a whole another level of anxiety. But I think that the reason why I decided to come on was I think that a lot of people feel kind of helpless, and I know I do, and I know that I all the time feel like I'm not doing enough. And I think that we need to stop talking to ourselves like that and realize that even the smallest action that you can take, I get it. Everybody's busy. Everybody's, there are people working 2 and 3 jobs. There are people who are taking care of their elderly parents. There are people who have kids, and, everybody's got their own stuff going on. But if you can like I did in 2015, I committed to making 20 political phone calls a week, and just find something that like that, like phone calls or hanging posters or whatever you can do, and just set a goal for yourself, and then do your best to meet that goal, and take action. And it doesn't have to be about Assange either. I mean, it would be great if it was, but it find something, that an issue that you're really passionate about, and commit to yourself that you're going to do, at least one thing every day to further that cause. And if everybody does that, I mean, we can accomplish a lot, I think.
And everyone says one person can't change the world. And then I would say, look at Chelsea, look at Julian, look at the people that are one person changing the fucking world. And any action you take and anything you do does change that. We alter physical reality by taking an action that alters physical reality. And when we alter digital reality, that doesn't transfer. You can tweet and you can be as outrage cultured as you want about things on the internet, But until you take that and you put it at someone's doorstep, or you put it at the front of the prison in Virginia where Chelsea Manning is, nothing will change. And so that's something that it's so important that people get out there, because any little thing you do creates that ripple. And if you have 1,000 other people in different parts of the country, and like for us, it's even global, like we're trying to get other people in other countries doing this too. So it's be a normal person and feel awkward, but eventually you'll reach the point where you're driving down the road and you're like, wow, those telephone poles would look great with some of my signs on them. Like, should I put one every 3 or one every 2? So it's, the more you do it, the less the more you do it, the more you deprogram yourself to being passive to injustice. And I think that that's the most important thing, is we can't just sit back anymore.
Exactly. And that's a major, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I want to expand real quick on that last question in the chat regarding candidates. Is it worth to even vote for any of the candidates at this point? It seems like those who don't speak out on this case are a bit untrustworthy. Here's the thing, and in the interest of like full disclosure, honesty, I don't personally believe that voting in a federal election as a regular human being has an impact. You don't have to agree with me by any means. I think that your vote has the most impact at the local level and on ballot measures or ordinances or propositions, things of that nature. I think that if you are active enough or fed up enough, that you should organize with some like-minded people in your community and find a couple of people that you can put on a couple of your local boards, your board of supervisors, whatever, even your water district, and infiltrate your community by taking over your local government. Like,
Be your
that's
friendly neighborhood non-state intelligence agent.
right, right. And I think that you can have an impact there. But I think while you do that, it's important to realize that voting in a rigged system inside a duopoly has only produced more triangulation, a more rightward trajectory, a deliberate march towards complete and total three-dimensional fascism, and that revolutions, political or otherwise, do not happen at the ballot box.
No one's legislated their way out of an oligarchy ever.
Never, not once has anyone done that.
Yeah. And like in Ohio, so we've had, because we got a bunch of Ohio people on the stream tonight. We have this year seen the criminalization of protests pass, where you can be labeled like an enemy of the oil companies by protesting oil and gas pipelines. Oil and gas companies have since been bailed out, to where we gave a massive taxpayer-funded bailout to First Energy, which is our energy corporation, specifically to expand fossil fuel and atomic energy production. And then on top of that, now they're going specifically after ballot measures. I believe it's SB 12 or HB 12, something like that. I'll have to look up the specifics, but it's literally changing the way that petitioning works on the ballot access for your petition, to make it so you need 10% of the vote from each county in Ohio. And that's in response to Tish O'Dell, who's a fucking hero in my opinion, at CellDef. And what she's doing is she actually started a petition to overturn state preemption, which what that means is the state of Ohio has the ability to overturn the laws and charters of any local community at their will if it violates a state law. So the short version of that is Nina Turner rallied up in Cuyahoga County and got the Cuyahoga County Board of Directors to pass a $15 an hour minimum wage. The state stepped in and said, no, you can't regulate minimum wage. We regulate minimum wage because we preempt you. There's a petition going around Ohio right now that will remove the state's ability to preempt ballot measures. So what they're doing in response to that, because that's most likely going to pass, is change the way that people can actually get ballot access to make it almost impossible for a citizen to put a ballot measure on the ballot. So and that's from a government that's completely controlled by Republicans right now. And people want to say Ohio's a purple state, but you look at our legislation, and we have 6 of 99 members of our state house that are Democrats, and then we have 93 members that are Republicans. On the state Senate side, we have 50 people total. I believe 47 of them are Republicans and 3 are Democrat. And the largest reason for that, not that I even support the duopoly, is because the Democrats can't find candidates to run. Like, I've sat down with Democrat organizers as a Green Party organizer, and they said, well, yeah, these are the districts that we can't find candidates in, where it's a clearly, obviously inner city blue district, but there just happens to be no Democrats that want to run there. And it's disgusting that people talk about Ohio like it's some purple state or something like that, when like our Republicans have ran out of right-wing bills to pass. Like, we have a heartbeat bill, or had to get rid of a heartbeat bill. And so we need people running for office. Like, as much as it sucks, it's still important. Like, even if you're running as an independent for your state representative or for your local board of directors or school board, even if it's a fucking uphill battle, but if that's the way that you want to perform activism, I would say do that, but make sure that what you're doing isn't inside and building power for anyone else.
Right, like organize efforts for community gardens, like engage in open anarchism while you're, you know,
Mhm.
while you're involving yourself with the state. Like,
Absolutely.
you know, find that middle ground, that balance within yourself that allows you to reconcile the fact that you're operating within a system that you know to be untrustworthy at best, and do something about it on the outside. Are we gonna wrap it up, Taylor?
Okay. All right. Well, I want to, before we wrap it up, Misty, I want to give you an opportunity for your last thoughts. And also, one of our viewers said, I can't find it, but they said that we should have Misty on again. So you are welcome to come back on at any time. We really enjoyed having you on this vigil with us. If you could please just give your final thoughts before we close out.
Well, I just really just thank you guys for having me on. I'm glad I pushed myself outside of my comfort zone a little bit. I think that, I hope that everybody kind of can kind of take away from this that we are going to have to be the voice for Julian Assange. It's going to be up to us. He's not going to be able to do this alone. And so, we really need to start kind of engaging with our friends and even people that maybe you don't agree with on other issues, but we're going to have to come together and figure out a way to fight back against this, attack on, the freedom of speech and freedom of press, because really nothing else matters without that, because whoever controls the narrative controls the world. So
Yep. We don't have the right to disagree about libertarianism and socialism unless we have the right of free speech.
I agree. That's exactly it. And so thank you guys for having me on. I'm sorry if I ran.
No, you did great. No, we really appreciate your insight and all that you're doing in your activism, despite, having 2 daughters and, being so busy and still finding the time to do that is really just such an admirable quality that you have. Where can people find you at?
I'm really just on Twitter at Sarcasm Stardust. So, you can find me there, but I just really thank you guys for having me on, and thank you guys for doing this, because I think that, after the Unity for J live streams ended, I was really happy to hear that somebody was going to pick up this mantle and continue, kind of this sort of battle. I know that Susie's got her own thing going on, so I'm really glad that you guys are doing this, and I watch every week, and you guys are doing a great job, and I really appreciate everything you guys do.
Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate that. And again, we do want to thank both of our guests. Again, you, Misty, thank you so much. And also to Sam Richards, who was on the Vigil earlier with us. We want to thank both of you guys. And I'll toss it over to my other co-hosts to close out.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks to everybody for tuning in and joining us tonight. I don't think since we started the stream we've dipped under 20 people so far. So we are steadily growing. It says right now we're at 26, and that's pretty cool to be ending a stream at midnight with 26 people watching. So I just want to give a thank you to everyone that actually tunes in to listen to this, because it's literally just a couple people with opinions that they feel like the rest of the world needs to hear. So I just want to give a big shout out to everyone that's actually watching.
Yeah, I will echo that sentiment. Much love to everyone who joined us to watch the Vigil tonight. Thank you so much, Misty, Andrew, and Taylor. You guys fucking rock it every single time. You can find me on Twitter at Slow News Day Show. My YouTube channel is YouTube.com/Slow News Day Podcast. There is a Patreon account for the show at patreon.com/Slow News Day. I, in addition to covering WikiLeaks news and Julian Assange, I do in-depth interviews with some incredibly kick-ass people. I will be sitting down with Elizabeth Voss tomorrow. That should be another very good time. It'll be the third time she's been back on the show this year. She is an incredible journalist. If you're not already hip to her stuff, please go look her up. And yeah, thanks for hanging out with us.
Yeah, so to end this off, I want to thank you guys so much for tuning in and watching us. This is starting to grow, and we're really happy about that and proud of that. Before we do close off, I do want to make one announcement, or a reminder, really. Next week, we do have our special free Assange Vigil series, which begins on Monday. So on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we will be having content creators on our vigils, and we will be talking to them. To name a few, we have Gordon Dimmick coming on. We have Graham Elwood, just to name a few. I know we have many others, and we will definitely be heading to Twitter to kind of post all of that information to you guys so you don't miss that. Our times will be a little bit different, but I believe on Wednesday we will be starting a little bit earlier than usual, but it will still be in the evening. I think about a half hour earlier. And then October 11th, there will be a series of events because that marks the 6-month anniversary since Julian Assange's arrest. So around the world, there will be events and protests taking place. And we will also tweet that out and make sure you guys are informed so you can participate in those particular actions. And then also on October 4th, there are other things that are going to be taking place around the world. Again, we will put that out there for you guys to participate in that. And actually, October 4th is the 13th anniversary of WikiLeaks. I can't believe it's been around for 13 years. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, it is really relatively a new organization. So we do want to make sure that we show our support on October 4th for WikiLeaks, because if it wasn't for WikiLeaks, so much of what goes on behind closed doors in our governments, we would not be aware of. So we will make sure that we keep you guys informed on those dates. And we thank you so much for watching our vigil tonight. My name is Taylor Hudak, and you can find me at TaylorM_Hudak.